Howdy, guys. Attorney Walter Hnot. Now, I was having this conversation with an individual who basically said to me, well, they're going to force me to retire. And I was like, well, they don't ever really force you to retire. I mean, you can always keep working. He's like, oh, they're going to force me to retire. And I said, well, and then I started thinking, I was like, wait a minute. There are instances where people are actually forced to retire. So the system originally was designed so that you would, at an appropriate time, want to retire. But now retirement benefits, they're just not enough financially to keep you going because inflation has just ravaged them because, the COLA, cost of living increase, hasn't been keeping up with the actual inflation. Now, as a result of that, there are some jobs out there, hard to think about it, where basically you do become forced to retire. I mean, you might be able to find a job in a different industry, but some you are de facto completely unable to work thereafter. So let me give you an example of some of those things, which are jobs. Now, keep in mind, these fall into the following categories. Some jobs are so dangerous that you become disabled, like horribly injured, severely impaired, extremely impaired, and you can no longer work. That is a form of retirement. We call it SSDI benefits. Then you have those by statute, where the pilots originally, I think it was 59, they said at 60 years old, then they bumped it to 65 for some, and now they're trying to, as of this year, bump it to 67 for commercial airline pilots. And I think it's over like 35 passengers or something like that. Then you have mandatory by employment agreement. That's where you sign an agreement where you can work at that job with that company up to that age. And then you basically have the other option, which is just where it becomes financially smart for you to go ahead and retire at that point, or then find a different job because, you get a pension after a certain amount of time. You get out of that job, you go to a different job. But one thing for sure that forces retirement is impairment, severe impairment. We're going to be going through essentially the 10 most dangerous jobs according to OSHA. So job number one that is the most fatal, because remember, if it's a fatal job, likely of you getting injured at this job is extremely high. And if you're injured, you go into SSDI benefits, and that's you on retirement. That's why when you're on Social Security disability insurance benefits, you ride those to your full retirement, because that is like an early retirement as a result of an inability to work thereafter. That's your traditional disability benefits. Fishing and hunting workers. So we're talking like commercial boats out there, pulling in fish, stuff like that. Fishing and hunting workers. Fatal injury rate is 132.1 people per 100,000 workers. This is the absolute most dangerous. So this is the most likely to force you to retire as you get older. Again, it's 132.1 people to every 100,000 workers die, which means that a much larger percentage of that have severe impairments that result. They get dragged by a hook, they get shot by something, or a bullet, comes off of something else and then goes into you, or a wild animal attacks you, etc. So that's basically that, or you get gored, whatever. All right, so the next one on this list, okay, next down the list would be logging workers. Now we know loggers have a lot of bad days. Nobody knows which way a tree is going to fall when the wind's blowing and the wind changes and there's some weird vine that catches it and it twists weird and it's got this built up tension inside it somewhere 30 feet up, and then the whole thing just flips the other way and crushes you. Loggers have an incredibly difficult job because at the end of the day, the bottom line is that they're dealing with massively large objects. They have to be directly next to them as they go through the process of cutting them down. So it's one of those things where you're going to see a lot of injuries causing disability, which means they'll be forced to retire in 2024 throughout that job at a higher rate. Okay. So they have a fatal injury rate of 91.7 people who are killed per every 100,000 workers. Now, roofers, I don't know why roofers are such a high rate. To be honest, I've done a lot of roofing in my life. Like roofers, I think that's just inexperience from people doing it. I had a really good teacher who taught me how to do a lot of roofing stuff. Unfortunately, 2 weeks after we finished that job, he took bad drugs, fentanyl, and then basically died. So that was a very, 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 very bad time in my life. But anyways, roofers, fatal injury rate, 47 people for every 100,000 roofers. Now, what makes roofing particularly dangerous is that you never know when some 2x4 or 2x6 on the roof is going to let go. It could be rot, it could be, pest control damage, whatever. But the bottom line is you never know when it's going to go ahead and go down. Now, you have essentially your 2x4, 2x6, then you have your plywood, and then you have your felt, your 30-point felt, and then you've got your shingles, right? So there's a lot there that could mesh together to potentially hold you up. But the thing is, all of that stuff fails after a certain amount of time. You get on a 50-year-old roof, you never know where you're going to be stepping and be safe. So there's always that potential. Next one down the line are construction workers. They have a fatal injury rate of 43.3 per 100,000 workers. Now, just so you guys know, this is coming from an article from Invictus Law, specifically the most dangerous jobs as outlined by OSHA. Okay. Now, let's go through this real quick. Construction workers, about 43.3 of them die, and that's a really sad thing, of every 100,000 workers. They're up high, they're dealing with a lot of tools, spinning blades, hot torches, all kinds of stuff. Aircraft pilots and flight engineers. Well, that's something you definitely don't, and I don't like to think about, but to be fair, I'm Walter Hnot III. Walter Hnot I passed away in a Beechcraft, which is a luxury plane. It's like a smaller plane, kind of like a Cessna-style plane, except it's a low wing. So basically, you've got aircraft pilots and flight engineers, about 34.3% per every 100,000 workers pass away. So you're going to see a lot of individuals in that arena, especially not so much, in my opinion, with the planes, but with the helicopters. You're going to see a lot of people getting injured with helicopters. Helicopters are just very extremely dangerous machines. Okay, next one. Refuse, waste, and recyclable material collectors. They have a fatality rate of around 33.1 people per every 100,000 workers. So bottom line is, look, these guys get caught in machines. These guys, they crush some neurological aspect of their back when lifting things. They're around horribly caustic materials all the time. So it is understandable that they would have a high level of disability that results in a high level of essentially passing away. Next one, we have our structural iron and steel workers. So we call these people basically anything. You got angle iron workers, you got any kind of structural. So bottom line is they have a 32.5 fatality rate of every 100,000 worker. I know personally quite a few structural iron and steel workers, whether they're doing welding on a pipe, whether they are building scaffolding that's like custom to a job. What happens is this. A lot of people don't realize, and I understand that like most people don't know what welding is. When you weld, you're basically melting a similar metal or the same metal onto basically another metal in hopes that you can glue the two together. And you want to have it go ahead and really cut in and gouge enough. And what they mean by that is where the metal that you go ahead and superheat gets, essentially assimilated into that other metal. What they don't talk about is how common a popped weld will occur. Pop welds are basically where the weld will fail, and then all of a sudden you could be standing on something and then it falls through or detaches, and now you've got a problem. You don't usually see a lot of popped welds in the heavy machinery environment because they mostly weld using stick welding, which is a very crude form of welding. But boy, oh boy, that's the heavy duty welding. You need heavy current. I'm talking heavy current to make that kind of welding work. The welding where you see a lot of pop welds where the weld is just crap and it doesn't really hold up kind of falls into your it's where they have a roll of this tiny wire and they send it through this device and you just pull a trigger and it welds and you just drag it along. That type of MIG welding, there's TIG, MIG, and stick. That type of MIG welding, you're going to see popped. You would never use that in an industrial or farming level situation where the machinery had to hold weights or be an important like structural thing. And I've seen them do that because I grew up in a farm area where they would use MIG. And those welds always pop. No matter what you do, those welds always pop. But those stick welds, it's rare, very rare that a stick weld will pop because, you are gouging into that metal with a lot of other metal to make it stick together. So as you can imagine, if you're sitting 2,000 feet up on something that was welded, properly for OSHA, but not enough in general, and it pops a weld, maybe a windstorm, and it just catches it right, potential disability or death. Okay. So they're at around 32.5 people for every 100,000 people that go ahead and pass away. Now the next one caught me off guard, delivery and truck drivers. So they have a 25.8 of every 100,000 workers who pass away. Truck drivers, including small scale delivery drivers, face hazards on the job because of motor vehicle accidents. Crashes remain to be the leading reason behind fatalities in this field. I didn't realize how many people pass away as a result of dangerous situations with driving. When we get all these blue lanes set up where all the autonomous vehicles are just doing their thing and you kind of fall asleep after watching a movie, you're kicking back, that we'll have those rates significantly drop down. But I didn't know that. I really didn't know that. Delivery and truck drivers got into that many accidents to cause 25.8 people for every 100,000 workers to die. And of course, a much larger percentage of that become disabled and then are forced to retire. Number 9, underground mining machine operators. Now, I would have thought that would have been way higher because, I think about mining machines, my brain goes back to like turn of the century. We place them in this ancient little thing and they go in there and they drill out the core, they core sample. Fatal injuries, 21.6. So 21.6 people for every 100,000 workers, miners who operate heavy machinery, that's a high fatality job. Obviously, with those types of jobs, you get a lot of people who become disabled. You're around toxic materials, you're around things that get in your lungs and cause cancer, you're around basically heavy moving machinery. I remember too, when you're digging into a mountainside and you have to go through rock, you have to use these carbide tips, and it's a very dangerous job. Like, think moving parts and then think like the most dangerous thing that could be moving parts, and that's in the mining field. Now, number 10 really surprised me because I didn't, I grew up on a farm and not that many people, like everybody has lost a finger in the farm business, but nobody's lost a life that I've known. Actually, that's not true. One person lost his life because the bull, and he was around that bull all his life. That bull, knew who he was. The bull was just in a shit, was in a bad mood, and then basically gored him to death. Number 10, farmers and agricultural workers. 20.9 people, so almost 21 people of every 100,000 workers will basically die. Farmers and agricultural workers operate heavy machinery on a regular basis. This heavy machinery is typically the cause behind fatalities in this field. Crashes involving tractors are one of the most common reasons workers in this field get killed. Crashes? I mean, certainly not tractor to tractor crashes like that. I don't think would ever happen, or if it would, it'd be less than 0.01% because farmers just don't drive into farmers. That's just not how it works. But maybe like it tips, I could see that. But I see a high rate of disability in the farmer arena. I don't see a high rate of fatality, but this says that there are. Now, these are essentially those individuals who will be forced de facto to go ahead and retire completely in 2024 and 2023 when they become severely injured. Obviously, if they pass away, then the retirement, whatever they paid in, sits in the account. Now we go on to another section, which I think is important to talk about jobs that you are, likely to lose as a result of your age. This is an article by U.S. News Money Group by Emily Brandon, May 23rd, 2016, when it was originally produced. We'll kind of go through some of the basics here so you understand exactly what we're shooting for. So the first job that they talk about are airline pilots, and we talked about them at the very beginning of this video. Originally 60 years old. I think it was 1959 was the rule for like 35 and over passengers for a plane, and then they require you to retire. I think it's at 65, and this year they're trying to raise it up to 67 for airline pilots to retire. So airline pilots, they're forced to by statute and employment agreement to go ahead and retire at a particular age. It's different though for different size aircraft and things like that. Assemblers who make components tend to have a high required rate of retirement. And the reason why is that you have to have good eye-hand coordination and you're around a lot of moving machinery. So you have to keep up. Keeping up with pace, that's a young man's game, a young woman's game. That's not an old person's game. Truck drivers. So truck drivers, based on contract and some states by statute, basically have to go ahead and stop driving truck. Also, if you have too many tickets of a sort, the company will not allow you, and they usually build and build. Nurses, another job that usually people are not able to continue to do all the way to full retirement mode with the federal government. Because they have to continue to, pick up patients, roll patients, carry heavy items, etc. Now, textile operators, they are very likely to have to retire before they actually finish that industry job at their maximum retirement age, or 66, 67, whatever you are, their max age would be 70. Textile operators, very often, because there's a sequence with textiles where you have to set up certain, cogs, certain wheels, certain whatever, shuttles to go ahead and move in a certain fashion. You're creating basically a system that has to go ahead and operate 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, one of those kind of gigs. So having your full brain capacity, full mobility of hands, and being able to go ahead and remember and continuously do that every single time, very, very important. Now, cleaners, ironically, were on this list. Let's read what they had to say about that. Private household cleaners need physical strength to operate cleaning equipment and lift supplies, and typically need to remain on their feet for much of the workday, which can become more difficult to do as you age. I would definitely say so. I've worked a lot of what I would call not fun jobs. I've worked fast food jobs, kind of like, for example, Starbucks. I've worked farm jobs. I've worked computer tech jobs. I've worked library jobs. I've worked guitar store jobs. I've worked all kinds of jobs. And I'll tell you, the ones where you have to stand on your feet and then kneel down, those are the worst. Those are the worst. Like if you're standing the whole day, that's better than having to stand and kneel a bunch. That's one of the big things. Photographers. Photography melds the creative and the technical. Photographers need familiarity with equipment and technology, as well as a steady hand with a quick finger that can capture a fleeting moment. So I don't agree with this article. I don't think photographers have to retire early or are likely to retire early. I think photographers, frankly, once you're a photographer, it's kind of like a Marine. You're always a photographer. So the bottom line is remember these photographers, these lenses, some of these lenses are $2,000. Some of these lenses are $5,000. Some of these lenses are $20,000, like a 1200 millimeter. I think it's like a f8 or whatever for the f-stop. That's like $20,000 from Canon. You know what I mean? So a decent f1.2 85 millimeter, which is like what you would use for most portrait or shooting videos and stuff like that, like your fixed focal of 85 millimeter, because our eyes see around 50, 55 millimeters. So an 85 millimeter is nice because there's no curvature of the outside of what it's capturing. 85 millimeter, that'll take you about 15 to 20 grand, or $1,500 to $2,000 for an L series glass from Canon. So as a lens, so I see them investing money, but I don't see them getting out of photography. They literally spend their lives buying better photography gear over and over and over. And remember, photography is all over the place. You can buy a photography camera for $200. You can buy a photography camera for $1,000. You can buy a Hasselblad, it's top of the line one, for $50,000. It goes up. So remember, a lot of people think like, oh, Nikon, whoa. Nikons aren't the top of the top. I mean, there's Leica above that, Hasselblad above that. There's a lot above Nikon. On here, cooks, I would agree with. They do the manual dexterity, having to memorize meals, having to have things time right, having to get a ton of meals out quickly. I could foresee being forced to retire early as a result of having to do a lot of physical labor. Childcare workers, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I see a lot of older people doing the childcare worker thing. It's not a dangerous job. I don't agree with that one. Supervisors and proprietors need to constantly acquire new. I don't agree with that one. I think supervisors often can stay in a job longer than basically what we would consider the lower level employees, because let's call it like it is, those lower level employees, they're doing the physical labor aspect of the work. If you look at all this stuff, the things that cause people to retire, that cause them to either die or become physically or mentally worn out as a result of that job, or there's a statute that restricts them, or there's there's some company employment restriction that falls into that. Those people tend to be in dangerous jobs because of physical limitation, or you might get shot, or one of those types of situations, or there's like a chemical aspect to it, or there's a heavy moving machinery parts aspect to it, or basically it's one of those situations where you're just around highly dangerous individuals. So like one thing that I was left out of these articles, which I was very surprised about, and I wanted to bring up to you, and I think you guys should be aware of it. I did not see, and this may have been on purpose, that they did not include police officers, sheriffs, federal agents, and military personnel. Because to me, like the fastest to retire people that I've ever come across are military personnel, because a lot of them come out and they're injured, and they've got all these problems and things like that. So the desk. So the bottom line is you would expect military people to come out if they've got enough medical conditions. They'll go on to VA benefits, and the VA benefits pay better than retirement, regular disability, etc. on the civilian side. So there would be a high level of individuals who realistically would fall into having to retire early. and then they get their VA check and they get their disability check, their civilian disability check. And that, that keeps them going, very well. They're way above the poverty level. They're not, they're way above the poverty level. So the point with all of this is, as a result of it, from my perspective, they left out what I think are the most important things to do an analysis on. But it's also incredibly, look, when they write these articles, there's always some consideration in the background as to what material they want to include with this stuff. Showing the fatality rate or the severity rate for who becomes severely impaired I would imagine for the military be pretty darn high. Same thing for police officers. In fact, some of my Masonic buddies are police officers, and I see, because they have their own little culture and their own little clique and their own little group. And I know them because I'm, part of that lodge and blah, blah, blah. But they, I see through their posts on Facebook all the time where they're, showing images of somebody who passed away in their field because they pulled over some drug dealer. The drug dealer, shot them. And then, that is what it is. Because a lot of you guys don't realize, like, these cops, when they pull over these terrible, terrible people, they're not, it's not like the movies where they shoot them in the chest and then they duck and run. That's not how it works. Like when they use their firearms, these bad people, they're not like doing like the full arm extension. They like, the director walks up and he's like, I need you with your lips to go like this, extend arms fully and smile and say, and it's not like that. The gun is hidden. They can't see what's going, and they're aiming for the person's head because they know there's no body armor on the officer's head. So that's how they're, able to escape that situation. Bottom line, I thought that this was an interesting idea to do a video on because, to be frank, he was saying, they're going to force me to retire. I was like, dude, you got all these options out there. You can go from this job to this job. Like, if I didn't have this job, and I know you guys know me as like the YouTube disability attorney where you're like, oh, that's that disability attorney that's online, or that's that YouTube guy. The reality is if I didn't have this job, I'd probably be doing real estate, or I don't know, maybe like farm activities. I don't even know, to be honest with you. I'd probably be doing real estate, or I'd be working with a nonprofit or something. Although I try to stay away from doing too much nonprofit because I have student loans and, well, I mean, they'll forgive them after 10 years, but I would like to pay them off. But at the same time, it's just like I have an insurmountable amount of student loans. Like it's just when you start out with $500,000 worth of student loans coming out of school into the world, like I am birthed into the world of business. And you're like, but you're like Atlas holding the world on your shoulders. Because, $500,000 coming out of school. So when you do that and you come out of school, it's like it's like Monopoly. It's like, you just had a really shitty game of Monopoly. And now for the rest of your life, you're just going to be going around that board, not having shit. That's kind of what it is. But anyways, and I love it. Whenever they have the damn Dave Ramsey show, they're like, they bring on some college kid and the college kid's like, I got $100,000 in debt. What am I going to do? And I'm like, bro, $100,000. Why don't you get some people that actually have higher education? College isn't like higher education here, people. That's not like a real problem. It is. They charge way too much for college. College should be free. It should at this point. Like if you think about our nation, things we could fix, free college. That's something we could fix. Having, armed officers at these schools. That's something we could fix. But everybody seems to just not, I don't know. It's like everybody would support that, except it doesn't happen. So, yeah. Because the schools are cash cows. That's why they can just like the drug industry, just like the firearm industry, although I'm a big supporter of Second Amendment rights and things like that. And it was funny too. And I'm going to be very honest with you. I purchased a new firearm, which is on the list of things that they want to get rid of, on the same day that Gavin Newsom came out and said, oh no, it arrived. Like I purchased it like a week before, and then it arrived at the store for me to go pick up. It arrived on the same day that Gavin Newsom came out and said, I want to come out with the 28th Amendment to, basically alter the Second Amendment and, change all these things, blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of hyper liberal individuals in my field that are like, guns are terrible. Oh my goodness, blah, 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 blah. And I'm sitting there listening to them. I'm just like, how is this possible? How does somebody, Like, how does somebody who supports disability rights not support gun rights? Like, how is that possible? You have literally a person who cannot run away from danger. Like I could run away from danger. I could if the circumstances allowed. But then you have these other people that are like, no, you can't have, oh, guns, they're so terrible. I'm like, dude, what do you, how do you say that to a person in a wheelchair that's facing somebody who intends to take their life or take their money or take their wheelchair? Like, what do you do? Like, how do you defend, how do you morally, internally believe that somebody like that should not be able to have a firearm? Like, how do you even mentally get that manipulated to the point where, and I understand, and I know some of you guys are watching from California, and I get it. And I'm not trying to be mean about it when it comes to that. But how do you morally or ethically get to the point where it's okay for you to dictate to a person who's physically incapable of defending themselves that you're going to take away their ability to, like, that's like going back to caveman days when you're like, well, that person has a broken ankle and guns haven't been invented yet. So, if we're gonna let somebody get eaten by that animal so that we can live in peace, that's the one. That's the one over there. I don't know. I don't know. To me, that's just wrong. It's unethical. Like, I think the highest rights of gun ownership should go to the disabled. Obviously, the mental impairment ones you have to be very careful with, have a test and a system to make sure they have mental capacity to own, use, regulate, clean their firearms, stuff like that. But how do you tell somebody with a walker that they can't have a firearm? Like, how do you do that? How do you do that? That's just sorry, I went off track there because it's the same idea. Who's forced to be retired? The first ones that are forced to be retired are the disabled, right? The ones who literally can't work thereafter. Because you can still, like, if somebody in their 80s is like not having enough money, they could still get a job. And if they're still able to drive food to someplace, right? Pick it up, drive it, whatever. That's their next job. They're not fully retired. They're partially retired. They got a gig job, right? But the disabled, a lot of them can't even do that. Some of them can, some of them can't. So anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I will catch you guys a little bit later. I see Shaquille Oatmeal, $500,000 in student loans. Yeah, it's so bad. It's around 300,000 right now. It's okay. It's at some point it'll get better at some point. I'm gonna play the lottery tomorrow, so we'll see what happens. I will catch you guys later. Please remember to like, subscribe, leave 5-star reviews, or leave any review if you like. I of course prefer the 5 stars. All you do for that is Google. You just go to Google, big search thing, disability resolution law firm, disability resolution Florida. Any one of those search things will pop it up. I hope you're doing well. The next video I'm going to be doing is about which immigrants or non-citizens or those working on their naturalization can potentially get SSI benefits. If you guys are going to watch that video, I understand that this video is something that a lot of people get excited about. I'm going to be making it completely and utterly politically neutral. Completely and utterly politically neutral. I'm going to be reading directly from the SSI report that's put out by the Social Security Administration, and then giving little comments and details, but it is going to be completely politically neutral, because I do receive emails from some people in the form of all kinds of things, such as death threats, such as mean comments. And honestly, at this point, it's like a river. It just flows over me. Although some of them sting. Some of them just like, oh, God, jeez. And the only ones I get mad about are when they make fun of my dogs. And I'm like, why would you do that? But anyways, I will catch you guys in the next video. Give me about 5 minutes and we'll go from there. All right. Catch you soon. Bye-bye, guys. Bye-bye.